Okay, I think this thing's working. We'll get started tonight with class. It's good to see everyone here. I'm glad everybody kind of braved the cold. It's been kind of a rough week, and I know maybe you didn't want to get out, but I'm glad that you did. We're going to continue in the second lesson of this kind of second series that we started. And kind of focusing in on some elements of that so we can learn more about the environment that they went into. Now, I lied to you a little bit last week. We are going chapter by chapter, and tonight we'll mainly focus in Paul's work in Iconium, Lystra, and Derbe, and then we'll see kind of a reverse back to Antioch eventually. But also tonight we'll talk about chapter 15 because it's there, and a major cultural and religious issue was settled at this council that we see with James and the mother church in Jerusalem. And so I think it's important that we talk about it because it's really a milestone decision in the promulgation of the gospel, because now we know that Gentiles don't have to be circumcised, and that was a big question. And also we'll talk a little bit about the time frame, because I think when we study through the book of Acts, we really think these events happened very close in time to one another, when in fact, but the time we reach this Jerusalem council, we are maybe some 17 or 18 years past Pentecost. A lot of things have gone on. And also we'll talk a little bit about how it's a mistake and an error in teaching to say that the minute that Jesus flew back into heaven, that Judaism and Jewish Christians ceased to practice the things of Torah and Judaism. If people teach or preach that, they simply haven't read their Bibles to see how much that continues. Especially like, for example, in Peter, when he's at the house of Simon the Tanner and he sees animals being lowered down in a blanket from heaven. He says, "No, Lord, I'm not about to eat from that." Well, if Peter thought the dietary laws went away the minute Jesus was resurrected from the grave, then he wouldn't worry about doing those things. We see Paul take vows. Jewish Christians continue to observe a great many things, including some of their festival days. Not because they were part of some covenant that they felt obligated to, but because they were just part of their life and their history. There's no reason for me to celebrate Passover because God didn't free my people from Egypt. There's also, I think, nothing wrong with a Jewish Christian celebrating Passover, not because it's mandated, but just taking an opportunity to remember what God did for His people. Now, I can't see anything on the back screen at all, so I may have to turn around and see that. Oh, look at there, it came up. It just went to sleep on me. We are in, primarily tonight, going to be talking about a region, I can see it now with, that is in what we call Southern Central Asia Minor or Southern Central modern day Turkey, with these cities that are very close to one another. Last week we finished up the talk about Antioch this is Antioch, often referred to as Pisidian Antioch, in kind of this region of Pisidia and Galatia. But tonight we're going to go over to Iconium, Lystra, then we're going to go to Derbe, and then Paul reverses gears all the way back around, and we see that kind of in the numbers 8 and 9 there. And going back to the Antioch in Syria that dispatched Paul and Barnabas in the first place. And so we're going to see kind of things come full circle. Some pretty major events happen in Paul's life and some very interesting religious and cultural things that we see. So this is the area that we'll be focused on tonight. This is an interesting step in Christianity. I show you these two books. I have the First Urban Christians. It's a very, very good book. It's a seminal book in Christian studies. It's about 25, 30 years old maybe by now, and so it could probably be revised. The other one is a collection of essays that I find the titles to very interesting, and I have put it on my wish list for hopefully a Father's Day gift on Amazon, or maybe a charitable member of the congregation wanted to buy it or something. If you want to be connected to my wish list, I got a lot of stuff on there, a lot of boring books, my wife says. But we have to remember, this is a real shift. For the most part, Jesus' teachings were very rural, if you will, away from larger cities. But Paul begins to migrate into very urban preaching. going from city to city, places where there's more people, a synagogue, a more urban environment. That gets even more urban when he begins to go to places like Ephesus and Corinth and Athens, major metropolitan areas, if you will, and very, very ancient cities in the Roman Empire. And so it's an interesting thing about where Paul went, where a lot of Jesus' preaching was very rural. Now we know he preached some in Jerusalem and some things there, and the church has founded itself in Jerusalem. But we think about it, as Paul went out he didn't do Sermon on the Mount, he did sermons in the synagogue or in some similar location along the way. So we have a very urban Christianity begin to develop, and it makes sense because that's where all the people were around in those areas. And so we start off in Acts 14. We go back. Remember, if you remember in Antioch, everybody's all excited about Paul preaching in the synagogue, and he comes in, he delivers the message related to Jesus as the Messiah, and everybody's, a lot of people are happy to hear that. They're very interested. They want to hear more. But eventually, and we're going to see this wash, rinse, repeat time and time again, there are those who oppose him and what he has to say. And I understand why they did that. For the same reasons, I understand why Paul opposed the message of Jesus Christ initially, because it was coming to usurp 15 plus centuries of Judaism and belief in the law of Moses and the covenant that was made with the Israelites at Sinai and then reiterated at Moab. I understand how ingrained that is. We don't understand because we only live in a nation that's less than 300 years old. Can you imagine the ideology of living in a nation of people that had been an organized people, if you will, for 15 centuries, living under a certain amount of religious belief? And remember, not like Americans where our religion's over here and our life is over here. For these people, religion and life were so intertwined, 100% intertwined, like many societies today. And so going over to Iconium, which is nearby, you saw on the map, where Paul and Barnabas, where'd they go? They go into a Jewish synagogue and spoke in such a way that a great number of both Jews and Greeks became believers. But the unbelieving Jews stirred up the Gentiles and poisoned their mind against the brothers. So they remained there a long time, speaking boldly for the Lord, who testified to the word of his grace by granting signs and wonders to be done through them. But the residents of the city were divided. Some sided with the Jews and some with the apostles. So we see the message is somewhat successful in some ways, and in some ways it's not successful. The first enemies that we have, the first persecutors of Christians were Jews. We see that throughout that's not an anti-Semitic statement. That's not anything against Jews today. I don't hold Jews today, like some Christians do, responsible for persecution 2,000 years ago. But that's where the message was taken to first. And so you expect that to be the case. We don't have documented, organized, government-mandated persecution of the church by the Roman Empire until the 3rd century. The biggest enemy of the church was initially Jewish opposition to this message, and also heresies that developed within Christianity. Craig has been speaking to some of those recently on Sunday nights about different things about Jesus' divinity and his humanity and those conflicting things. Early Christianity kind of had its own internal issues that they have there. But we're going to see this time and time again. He goes to the synagogue. It makes sense to go to the synagogue and begin teaching there and telling the Jews, and some of them believe because some of them may be expecting a Messiah. Also we see, and we're going to see later on in our reading, that he's able to heal a crippled man in the city of Lystra, and then they turn around and turn on him and stone him nearly to death for his good work there. But here we see that it's just the synagogue is the place to go and thinking through that. And so when we go there, I had a student in the class ask me a question. And so this is a fellow student, and so I told her that I would ask you guys the question. We see that Paul goes to a synagogue. They seem very amenable to letting him speak. I don't know if it's because he's just a visiting entourage of Jews. Maybe he's got a little bit of clout or paperwork from coming from Antioch or what that, but he's allowed to speak in these synagogues. And so the question was asked, would it be possible or desirable or beneficial, and so I'm going to get your feedback, for Christians of different faith traditions and I'm talking about different Christian faith traditions, to go to one another's places of worship and hold public conversations or presentations in this same pattern of Paul going to Asian and Greek synagogues. In a nutshell, could somebody from this congregation go to a different Christian tradition faith worship place up the road and be allowed to speak? That's a question. Is that taking you that long to process that? You thinking about that? Okay, you're thinking about that. Yeah, I think you're right. I think it would very much depend on the church that you went to. They might ask you a couple of questions like, hey, what do you plan on talking about? You're not going to get up here and advocate for Satan or something, are you? I mean, what are you going to do? You're going to do a lesson out of the Bible? Would you be allowed to come and to speak? Now, keep in mind, we're talking about a pretty revolutionary message that Paul is teaching. We're not talking about me going up the road and doing a lesson on the Sermon on the Mount, okay, where everybody's like, yeah, we love that story, and that's commonly accepted. He's going somewhere and telling them something they wouldn't naturally accept. And so think about it in that way. What do you think? Would you be willing to? Tim says he would be willing to. No, okay. I thought you were volunteering.
Two things. Logic would dictate, would we allow someone to come in here with a contradictory message? The answer, looking at Jason up here, probably not. One of our elders, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
He says no.
I got a confirmation. And so I would expect the same would apply if we went to wherever.
Okay.
And the second comment, there's major differences between our way of life and their way of life.
You mean our way of life and somebody up the road, or your way of life and the people?
Yeah.
Like, the ancient. All right.
Thank you for the clarification. Like you said, while you may be in an urban environment with two, maybe three religions, Greeks, Jews, I don't know, whatever else there is.
That's about it.
Each one of those has a significant portion of those people's lives.
Okay.
Right? And like you said it earlier, here in America, there is a general consensus of the public with your life and then come to worship.
Mm-hmm.
You do something else, then you go to worship across many denominations.
Okay.
Right? And so there's a significant difference there with how the perception is of what the message would be.
Okay.
We have umpteen denominations out there. It's like you can go shop for whatever fits best your message.
Okay. I'm trying to remember everything you said because I've got to regurgitate it to everybody in the room and online. But in general, definitely there are many. I don't use the word denominations anymore because that's an antiquated word. A denomination demands that some church is part of a larger group, a governing church. And some Christian traditions are that way, perhaps like a Methodist tradition. But so many churches now up and down the road, they are not governed by a central body. They're self-governing, you might say, in Senate, but others are not. I have a cousin that's a preacher for the Cumberland Presbyterian Church, and he gets sent all over the country, depending where he may wind up going. And so I do think there's a difference between, Tim was saying, between the time that Paul is teaching and today, and I wanted to expand on that a little bit. There's also a much greater willingness amongst the Greeks to listen to other philosophies. And to be willing to listen to what other people have to say. We think about, and we'll talk about this more in Acts 17, Paul gets an audience either at or before the Areopagus, depending on how you want to translate that, and they're willing to listen to what he has to say, and they're not even Jews. They're like, well, this guy said something very interesting about this unknown God, and they're like, tell us about your philosophy. That's what they would have called Christianity. We think about philosophy as a bunch of people sitting around smoking pipes, talking about how humanity and things of that nature. But in going through that, I think you're right. Jason did nod his head in response to your statement. But you said something interesting. If somebody came and brought a contradictory message, we wouldn't let them. But I would also say we probably wouldn't let anybody come who just wanted to simply preach, Jesus says, I am the light of the world, if they weren't a member of the Restorationist tradition, and even certain parts of the Restorationist tradition, Disciples of Christ, Christian Church, probably wouldn't let them speak here either. So we might expect that same level of pushback from a different Christian tradition along those lines. And so that's a good comment. I hope I maybe summarized what you said. You said a lot. I can only remember so much. My memory is going the same way my hair is going in that. Now, what about you left-wingers over here? Y'all agree with Tim? He's an extreme right-winger over here. Y'all okay with him? You agree with that thought process? Now, would we not do that because we're not bold enough to go share that with other people? And should we be bold in going to share that with other people? Paul's pretty bold, and so I think it's very contextually applicable that he goes and does this, because Paul ain't stupid. He knows this message is not going to be welcomed by all. I know he wishes they would be welcomed by all, but remember, Paul was a Jew who rejected Jesus. He's going to be like, these people might be like me, and I was going to arrest people and throw them in prison and breathing murderous threats. I don't know why people call Paul a murderer. He didn't murder anybody that we see in the biblical text. Breathing murderous threats against people. I don't know what would happen if we went somewhere. I think it would depend greatly upon the particular church that we went to. I know that we would not allow someone from a different Christian tradition to speak in front of this assembly, and I understand why that is, and it makes sense, but keep in mind, I don't feel convicted to go, personally, Tim Martin, I don't feel convicted to go tell people who already have full-blown access to the gospel and believe in Jesus Christ. I don't feel a strong desire to talk to them about stuff. I don't mind sit down and have a conversation about biblical studies or something with them along those lines. I don't feel any need to go and correct them when there are a full-blown 5 billion people on this planet that don't believe in Jesus Christ at all, and we're not reaching them. And so I really feel much more compelled to go to India or the Asian subcontinent and talk to Africa and talk to them about Jesus Christ, because none of them believe in Jesus Christ. And the fastest growing place on the earth right now for the church is where? India, that's right. Because look, I've only got to evangelize a city block and I've reached 1 million people. It's like, there are people living shoulder to shoulder in those areas. And so I do wish that we could have civil conversations with people of other Christian traditions. And I have enjoyed the privilege of being able to do that in my academic work, where I've worked on especially on my doctorate. Even though I went to a Church of Christ university at Ambridge, only about half or to a third of my classmates were of the Restorationist tradition. So it was very, very, and you don't have petty, stupid arguments at that level. We are all respectful of one another, and we talk about things, and we present different viewpoints without everybody getting their feelings hurt. And so I do wish we could do that. And I know some people do feel, and I admire people that do, feel compelled to go correct other people's doctrine in Christianity. I don't see a biblical call to do that. What I see in the Bible is what was worried about was issues and heresies within each individual congregation. Nobody's told to go to another congregation and straighten out their issues, because there's plenty to be dealt with in Corinth or in Ephesus. And our elders here are autonomous. And so it's really none of our business what another Church of Christ is doing. It really is not. If you want to proclaim autonomy, then autonomy is autonomy, and these 4 walls are the only thing that falls under our elders' purview. I do wish we could have more conversations. I think there's a lot to be learned from us. I think there's a lot to be learned from other people. But I think it'd be possible to answer maybe my own question. Some of you in here, I think probably y'all were kind of nanny-goating a little bit. I think maybe you think it was possible. It may depend on the particular group we went to. Some people may be like, oh, sure, we don't have a preacher today anyway, so why don't you get up and talk? Or at least go in and have healthy conversations with people. I'm going to tell you that is really possible, because we do get invited to do things like that in the community. There's frequently preacher get-togethers. I don't get invited to those because I'm not a preacher, but the city does a lot of things along those lines, and it's a plus of things. Well, there we go. Something going on in my system. There we go. Tim, you're talking too long. Okay, so we're going to move on from this question, but and think of it. It is desirable, I think, for us to share our understanding of Scripture with other people. all kinds of other people. And even our knowledge, not just about like salvation or ecclesiology, meaning the function and shape and structure of the church, but also just about all kinds of things in the Bible. I read people from other faith traditions. As a matter of fact, I don't read any commentary by restorationists. Very few. Maybe I might read something by Homer Haley because he's not arrogant, but I don't typically even read those. So most of my studies are involved in that. But keep in mind, I think there is a difference between what Paul was going to do to introduce something to a group of people that we normally assume would at least believe in God, believe in Scripture, be expecting the Messiah. But he was taking a much different message to them, a drastically different message than I would be taking to another Christian tradition down the street, right? I wouldn't be coming in to tell them there's something besides Jesus. And that's what message Paul was bringing. There's something besides Moses. Now, that's a big statement. Can you imagine if I went to a Christian church in the community and said, there's a different plan other than Jesus? How long do you think I would talk? Not very long. And so I do think it's important that we think about this. And I want you to know that just because I don't go do those things doesn't mean I don't think you ought to share your understanding of Scripture with anybody. It's just not something I feel a gigantic, and I'm not an evangelist. Some are given to be evangelists. I am not. I'm given to be a teacher, and you may disagree with that. But that's what I get paid to do, at least whether I'm given to it or not. And so I do think, to answer the question, maybe that it's a different situation back then. But I wish we could. I guess I wish it would be. I do think it'd be beneficial. I think it'd be beneficial to hear for us to hear things. I think it'd be beneficial to share those other things. Feel free to give me some more thoughts after class if you want to in looking at that. All right, after we leave Antioch, we do deal with a geography and culture, a little bit smaller towns, rustic, local, but very Greek and Roman characteristics to them. Keep in mind, these cities were very Greek before they were Roman, and these are cities that were taken over and established and built during Alexander the Great's expansion of the Greek Empire, the Macedonian Empire, and in the following years after this. So these cities are really, really Greek in nature, more so than they are Roman. Now, as Paul moves westward, Corinth, for example, was laid out as a very Roman city because the Romans destroyed it and rebuilt it. But you'll see in a minute that Paul and Barnabas aren't called Jupiter and Mercury. They're called Zeus and Hermes, which are Greek names for those two gods. And so they do have those things. Iconium, there winds up being a schism between the Jews and the apostles, and they're nearly stoned to death. They're more successful in Lystra, and this is where we see a miracle occur. That Paul sees a man who is crippled and cannot walk, but yet he sees in him that he had the faith to be healed. Now, it's a very interesting word. Many of your translations may say healed or made well there. The Greek word is sozo, based on that verb sozo, which means to be saved. And so when we think about the word saved, we mainly think about it in a religious context. But keep in mind, that word in the Greek language did not mean be saved in a religious context. It meant that someone was drowning and I sent them a life preserver and I saved their life in doing it. And so that word is not like some unique word amongst Christianity. And so often it says to be healed by translators because that really kind of diss what it means. Because what does Paul do? Get up and walk. And he's able to do that, which makes people go crazy. And they're kind of like, whoa, this is something pretty serious. These guys are gods down in human flesh. I can imagine Paul and Barnabas like, oh, no. We're trying to tell you about God coming in human flesh, but we are not God in human flesh. And they think they're Zeus and Hermes. And what do they begin to do? They get ready to do what? They go offer sacrifices to it. Can you imagine Paul and Barnabas is like, no. This is like, I'd be like, oh, no. I got to correct this real quick before God sees this. I don't want there to be any thought process. Can you imagine the Jews looking at him and being like, boy, y'all let them sacrifice to you. We're going to write you off right away. And thinking through that. And he said, no, it's not. But he does take use of the opportunity in 14, 15 through 17, kind of what I referred to earlier in chapter 17, and we'll look at when we get there, is he speaks to them kind of in the context of their own religion. and says, oh, no, 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 we're not those. That's not what we are. We would never think about the Creator and make things, created things to worship. And he kind of nicely rebukes them and straightens them out using kind of the context of their own religion. Not nearly as deeply as he does in Athens when we see that, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But keep in mind, if you're going to reach the Gentiles, and this went on in early Christian apologetics in the 2nd century as well. You can appeal to the fact that they already believe in deity. Some of them, not everybody, but they already believe in gods. You know, and that's what Tim said a minute ago. Yeah, there were different religious groups. You had Jews, which have been a small group of people. Christianity begins to break on the scene. But for the most part, Greco-Roman religion, what we might call mythology. There are also cults, such as like the cult of Isis and other groups that would be around. Also, trade guilds are something very important to understand. We would think about that like maybe a modern-day trade union, where the people within that trade guild had a certain profession, whether it's metalworking or whatever it may wind up. Silversmiths, like in Ephesus, that we'll talk about. But they had patron gods of that, kind of like today somebody might have like a patron god of police officers or a patron god of firefighters. I'm not saying police and firefighters are idolaters. I'm saying that sometimes they have like a saint that they think, people oversee police officers, especially in like Catholic areas that you might have. So keep in mind, this is really integrated in their life. But these people, Paul tries to kind of talk in their own language. And I think we can learn from that. If we reach out to somebody who absolutely believes in no deity whatsoever, an absolute atheist, we might say. You don't have to be militant to be an atheist. You may just be somebody who says, look, I don't believe that there's any gods. I don't believe any of that stuff. Those folks are harder to convince of something than someone who says, yeah, I believe in a divine creator. I don't necessarily call him Yahweh or Allah or anything like that, but I believe in some sort of creator because I don't think all this could come about on its own. And I kind of believe different religions or different things and elements, at least they have like a religious bent to them. And so keep in mind that this environment of what we would call idolatry, at least they believed in some kind of gods. They believed that God's created things. They even believed that God's had sons. And so you can think about, sometimes we can find some way of getting a wedge in with somebody using their existing beliefs. However, even though Paul had made somebody, I say Paul, God through Paul, had caused somebody to be healed and able to walk that had been crippled and not able to walk, the tide turns against Paul in Lystra and he gets stoned. I should say that clearly. He gets stoned nearly to death, not that he got stoned like we might say that in the context like the 1960s. But Paul got stoned as a capital punishment, stoned. And most of the time, being stoned is not usually survivable. Now, some people think that Paul died and was brought back to life, but the text does not say that. The text seems like Paul got beat nearly to death, thrown outside the city, and he's able to regain his strength. Did God divinely protect him? I don't know. Maybe so. I don't have anything against that. But the text just doesn't give me a lot of knowledge about that. One thing I can tell you is Paul must have been a tough bird because, they don't stone you with gravel. They throw pretty big rocks at you to do that. And he survived. This is one of the reasons that I admire Timothy's faith, not just because he's got a really great name. But I admire Timothy because I really think probably there's a good chance that Timothy knew about this. Remember, because when Paul comes back to Lystra on the next missionary trip, not when he cycles back through here, Timothy joins the crew. And Timothy's got a good report of being a faithful disciple. And can you imagine? I don't know if I want to join this guy's posse or not. He got stoned the last time he was in town through there. So I kind of admire the willingness of Timothy to join in with Paul because, he knew, or probably knew, that there's a chance that this is life-threatening, dangerous work that I might be running into. So we do see him cycle back around for a return trip. When he gets done, he goes over to Derbe, and checking back in, going back through these cities, and telling the Christians there, the converts there, that, hey, we've had success in these other locations. In Derbe, I come back through Lystra and reporting, the gospel has taken root. And I think that's a good thing. That would be encouraging to these folks. Keep in mind, we're talking about a group of converts to Christ that are an extremely small minority in their religious environment around what they are. Very, very tough, brand new religion. They don't have a 27-book New Testament open to and encourage them and instruct them. They have whatever Paul told them. And perhaps if they did have miraculous inspired teachers amongst them, I don't know if they did or not. That's an assumption some people make, and that's perfectly fine. We see an example of that perhaps in Corinth, but the text doesn't tell me that here. But you still don't have a Judeo-Christian world that they feel welcome and common amongst. And it'd be very, very encouraging to hear Paul come back and say, hey, look, things have been a little bit of a bumpy road, but the gospel has found success. So you're not believing in something in vain. You're believing in something that other people have as well, which to us as human beings can be very encouraging. You know, how discouraging would it be to be one of the 5 or 6 people in the entire Mount Jewett community that believed in Jesus Christ? You would feel like maybe something's wrong with me. Okay, maybe everybody else is right. Well, welcome to Christianity for a lot of our brothers and sisters around the world, that they number in the dozens or the hundreds in communities of thousands around the world. Or they're somewhere where Christianity used to flourish. You know, we got missionaries in France. You know how crazy that is? I mean, France is like one of these seats of Christianity for the past like 16 or 17 centuries. One of the grandest cathedrals of all Christianity is in Paris. I've been to that pre-burned down. I want to go see it now that it's been restored. I'm telling you, people put a lot of sweat equity in that place in their devotion to God to build that place with hand tools. So the place in the United States is becoming that. There are already other countries sending Christian missionaries to the United States. We are sending missionaries out in the United States. So keep in mind that for a lot of our brothers and sisters in Christ around the world, they're in this minority. They like to hear that the gospel is being successful, and I'm sure these people would be as well. Now, one of the things that is told to Christians constantly, whether it's in Paul's letters, probably in Paul's sermons, even in Jesus to his disciples, you should expect persecution, right? Count it all joy, my brethren. Blessed are you when people speak all kinds of evil things about you. Now, we don't like that because we get our little feelings hurt when we do that, and we get all scared. But Christians from cover to cover in the New Testament are told to expect to be persecuted by other people and to can they be elders? Because the elders' qualifications 20 years later in 1 Timothy and Titus say, oh, can you hear me now? Okay, see, Flew Allen cut me off for a little bit. I was getting all worked up, lathered up, preaching on you. People worry to death, but how can they be elders 20 years before those qualifications were put out? Because these were all recent converts. And people make up answers that we have no biblical basis for in saying, oh, well, they must have been mature Jews. Okay. understand that we don't have to project back the qualifications for an elder in 1 Timothy and Titus and demand that be the case in Iconium nearly 20 years before that. Paul and Barnabas were inspired men. They knew who to appoint as elders, and they knew who the Lord wanted to be qualified and what their qualifications for. It makes plenty of sense that 15 years down the road that one of the qualifications for elders is not recent converts, because there were people, remember, Paul is writing to Timothy in the city of Ephesus where Christianity has been around for almost 2 decades, and there could be plenty of men who were not recent converts. So I don't know why people get so worked up about that. It doesn't make any difference. Keep in mind, we need to read 1 Timothy and Titus when 1 Timothy and Titus were read, and they were written to areas where the church was mature. Paul told Titus, go appoint elders in every city on the Isle of Crete. And so people get all worked up and feel like we have to insert. If you say that it had to mean that they were mature Jews, then you are inserting things into the Bible. Okay? And you're speculating. And it's okay, we want to speculate like that, but it's more inclined to be like, I think Paul and Barnabas knew what the Lord wanted in elders because they had the Holy Spirit in them and they were inspired writers, inspired men. Who's to say what they knew that they were? We know that they had to be Christians and they had to be respected men in their community, because that's the status for any group of elders. Elders is not a Christian invention. The concept of wise, respectable, honored men leading a community of people is as old as humanity. But now we have a new design in the Lord. And so I don't know why people worry about that so much. I trust Paul and Barnabas. That's what I'm going to tell you. And I trust Paul and Silas to do what the Lord wanted. The last stops that they have are in Perga and Attalia, however you want to pronounce that, before they go back and they give a mission report back in Syrian Antioch. And rightly so. I think this is why modern churches believe it's biblical, and I think they rightly do, to have missionaries come back and give reports on work if they were dispatched out by a congregation and sent out. Now, we don't have any biblical authorization to continually send missionaries money. Paul did not receive financial support from Antioch, as best we can tell, or anywhere else he went, because he had to go work as a tent maker and other things and rely on the hospitality of it. Do I think that's wrong to do? No, I don't think it's wrong to do. But definitely to have a mission report given back to the church, we have an example of that in the Bible, and I'd want to know too. Hopefully the people in Antioch were very excited. I kind of admire Paul about it. You got stoned to death? We're not going back out with you, but we do see some people sign up to go with him. And so a brief interlude before Paul moves back into what we call his second missionary journey is there becomes to be an issue in Antioch about Gentiles. And should they be circumcised? Once again, if you think Judaism disappeared from Christianity, why are people still arguing about circumcision nearly 2 decades after Jesus left this earth? And so we have a little bit different reaction here to Gentile conversion than maybe we saw in Phoenicia and Samaria. But if you remember, when Peter went and he helped bring the gospel to Cornelius' household, when he went back in Jerusalem, they were like, "What are you doing? What are you doing talking to Gentiles, going into their house, sharing this message with them?" Remember what Peter said? He said, if you don't remember it, go back and look it up. He said, "Wait a minute. I saw the same thing that happened to us. The Holy Spirit come down. We start speaking in different languages. I saw the same thing happen to them." And Peter says, I think that's the Lord's validation of what's happening. That's the whole, people get all tied up in that about in their Holy Spirit studies. It merely is God's validation of the message being taken to the Gentiles, because the same thing happened. That's what Peter says. And they're all kind of like, okay, that makes sense. Oh, we understand what you're saying. Peter's like, I'm just telling you, man, the same thing happened to us on that message. And so there's some Pharisees that come up. Now, one has to assume that these are Pharisees that have converted to Christianity. But remember, Pharisees, as we talked about in our previous study, very, very tight rule followers of Torah. They're saying the Gentiles have to be circumcised. They need to be circumcised in accordance with the law of Moses. And even back before Moses, the first Jew really to take on circumcision as a sign of a covenant was who? Abraham, right? He cut a covenant with Abraham. So the mark of circumcision with that, he cut the animals in half, walked in between them. And so this is a very, very ancient part of Judaism that we see here. Now, James comes in, and interestingly, he calls Peter Simeon, which is what Simon is. because Simeon is a Jewish name. Petros is a Greek name. But it's interesting that he uses the word Simeon here. He says, hey, hold on a second. You remember when Peter brought this last time and we heard about this? We didn't ask Cornelius to be circumcised and go in there. So we're looking back at chapter 11, which I was just meaning what was going on there. And the council here, or the mother church in Jerusalem, they rule and say, no, they don't. However, I am going to give you some stipulations, right? And we look at those stipulations. This is an open book test. In 15:20, what are some of the stipulations that are given for the Gentiles? They do have to do some things. Tell them to do what? Ring a bell. Yeah, we're not going to eat any meat, sacrifice to idols, a very Jewish observance. What else? Sexual immorality, that's a good thing to stay away from, right? We're going to agree with that. What else? Anything else? What's that? Eating blood and animals. Boy, there's some very Jewish rules. There's some very Jewish rules being given to them and mandated out to Christianity. So guys and gals, you can't eat your steaks rare anymore. I'm sorry. That's what James said. It'd really be a heartbreaker for me. I'm glad I don't have to follow that at all. At the end of this, we do see joining the party are Judas and Silas. Now, we see a little bit of a disagreement between Paul and Barnabas about his cousin John Mark, who, remember we talked about last week, kind of left the scene on him midstream a little bit. Thankfully, we think that Paul and John Mark made up later on down the road. But it's going to be that Barnabas is going to go off in one direction and go continue to spread the gospel. Even when brothers disagree about something, they still go keep the mission plan going. And then Paul is going to go off with Silas and some other guys. And so we kind of see the end of the dynamic duo of Paul and Barnabas, and we move into the concept of Paul and Silas. And so, okay, for next week, we're going to pick up, and you might have to take a picture of this because it's not as easy to remember. I know some of y'all are really, really sharp in here. Scott's got this already committed to memory. I can just tell by looking at him in his brain. We'll go pick up in Acts 15:36 and go to 16:40, and that'll include Paul's second mission trip. So, summarizing back up where we are right now, we finished up Paul's first mission trip into Asia Minor. I want us to remember that some of the things as we study and go through this lesson, I got to finish up here, I've got 2 or 3 minutes, is that Paul was going into an environment very different than Peter and John went into, right? Because Peter and John went and preached the gospel primarily in Palestine or Samaria, where Judaism was probably the dominant religion. I say that, I don't have numbers to quantify that, but we see these oddball reactions to it. And I think these people who claimed that Paul and Barnabas were Zeus and Hermes probably did so with good hearts. They're very religious people, and they see somebody work a miracle and they recognize it as the work of deity. So that seems a little weird and idolatrous to us, but keep in mind, I actually think that's a positive thing, because at least they recognized the work of a deity and the work of God's. The uphill battle that we will see go on will continue to be with Jews that are in certain locations. But as Paul moves westward, we're going to see him move into areas of conflict with other religions and with Rome. He begins to rub things the wrong way. And we wonder, why does that not, it doesn't seem to matter in these smaller cities in Central South Asia Minor. But it's going to start mattering when he goes to places and he starts upsetting people's lifestyles. Because when I go into a town, for example, let's just say there were Jews in Ephesus, for example. They never went to the temple of Jupiter or the temple of Artemis or anywhere else and offered sacrifices or gave money or did anything to honor Zeus, right? They didn't believe in him. They never went there. But what about Gentiles who were faithful adherents to, as Tim said, Greek religion, Roman religion, whatever cult, whatever it was, and then they convert to Christianity? What does that do? It subtracts people from that religion. It means that if I went into a town and converted half the people that were Gentiles, then half those people would no longer go to the temple. and all of a sudden I'm not selling as many little silver shrines anymore, and my prostitutes aren't paid. A lot of things offerings are not made in the temple, and also from just a pious point of view, Zeus is fixing to be angry because nobody's coming to his temple to worship. Or Artemis, the great goddess of Ephesus, is going to be upset, and our crops aren't going to grow, and the rain's not going to fall, and our women aren't going to be fertile, and our animals are not going to be fertile because the gods are going to be angry with them. And so I want us to think about that as we go through things the next couple. If you think about that, read your homework. We're out of time, I think. Yeah, we're out of time. All right, we'll see you guys Sunday. Please be here. The elders are going to have a combined service, and it'll be a blessing, so all the adults will be in the auditorium.